Bill Clinton on May 26, 1994, delinked human rights from trade. That's when the Chinese Communist Party said, these guys are bluffers, they are fake, and I put right at Clinton's foot because he delinked it, and that's when they said profits trump treating their own people with basic human rights. And again, torture is the means by which they do everything. If you or I are arrested as a political prisoner in the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party will torture you and me, and that's what they do. It's routine, it's systemic, and it's absolutely pervasive.
That's a very important date you mentioned,
Yeah.
because I guess things didn't have to be this way. Since 1994, in my own analysis, the U.S. and others built the world's greatest dictatorship effectively.
Yes.
Willingly and with great fanfare almost. You know, speaking of consistent, you've been consistent on these things. Let's roll a clip from C-SPAN from a while back.
Mr. Clinton once said that in foreign policy, one has to have, quote, great personal strength to make the right decision. However, it takes little personal strength to turn one's back on millions of prisoners of conscience and people in slave labor camps, especially when profits are involved. It takes little personal strength to close your eyes to the millions of women and children victimized by draconian population control policies, which include forced abortions and the brutal murders of babies who are born but don't meet standards of health or ability or just happen to be baby girls. Despite the soothing rhetoric, the administration has chosen to ignore the millions who are denied the right to practice their faith. Religious repression is up significantly, especially since Li Peng's 2 new decrees were signed in January. Let me just finally say that Harry Wu, as some of you may know, just a week ago, made a very compelling case that the use of Gulag labor-produced goods continues unabated. It has not been investigated the way we would like to see it investigated, and the so-called Memorandum of Understanding is very weak and flawed, and we have every reason to believe that our markets are receiving these goods that have been made by prisoners of conscience and by prisoners, religious prisoners, and by regular inmates.
It seems like a lot of what you said here has actually come to pass.
Yeah, and it absolutely has. I offered the First Amendments in the early 80s to highlight and combat the use of forced abortion and forced sterilization in China as part of the one child per couple policy, which made brothers and sisters illegal and coerced women to abort. And they had no say. They were told the baby's dead because you didn't get permission and you're not part of the quota system that they established. I can't tell you how disappointing it was to see so many Sino hands, people who were supposedly experts, who just looked the other way as all of these women were being exploited. So I offered an amendment. It was backed and it won. And Ronald Reagan certainly did it through his executive orders as well. They said no funds to any organization that allows coercive population control to happen. No direct funding to China for sure. And the UN Population Fund was found to be the major contributor and enabler of the Chinese Communist Party's war on women and their babies. And the catastrophic impact was, it's arguably the worst crime, certainly in numbers, ever committed against women. At the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, forced abortion by the Nazis was properly construed to be a crime against humanity. Well, it's no less a crime against humanity when the Chinese Communist Party uses it. And they use it with telling effect against targeted groups, whether it be the Falun Gong or the Tibetan Buddhists or the Uyghurs or Christians, to keep their numbers down. And that is genocide. That's one of the 5 pillars of what constitutes genocide, reducing the births through this coercive means by design in order to have fewer of that ethnicity or that group or that religious denomination in China or anywhere else. So their disparity is unbelievable. They're missing, some estimates, 60 million females, women who systematically were exterminated by the Chinese Communist Party, because if you can only have one in a society where there's a boy preference, the girl is sacrificed and killed. So the girl child and women, many of whom are not not there. Men can't find wives to marry because they've been destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party. And now they're trying to reverse it with a 3-child per couple policy. But the damage and the atrocity has been done to countless number of Chinese women. And so that's just one. All the other human rights abuses, the crackdown on the Falun Gong, the organ harvesting outrage that is an everyday occurrence in China, there's a parade of horribles here, the likes of which, we saw in Nazi Germany and other dictatorships. The excesses, the outrages of Stalin are now being committed by Xi Jinping. And he needs to be seen for that. What he did to Hong Kong. In 2014, I introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and all the big know-it-alls said, oh, don't do that. He'll never go after the Basic Law or the UK-Sino treaty. He won't undermine the special nature of Hong Kong. I said, yes, he will. You don't understand Xi Jinping. He is a dictator with few equals in the world. And again, Stalin comes to mind, Mao Zedong comes to mind, Adolf Hitler comes to mind. That's how egregious his behavior really is. And sure enough, they have crushed the Hong Kongers. It is no longer a bastion of freedom, and our bill, and Marco Rubio did it on the Senate side, became law, but it was years too late. We could have done it in 2014 with the beginning of the umbrella movement. And that's what I keep seeing all these years. I had the hearings on World Trade Organization ascension, allowing China into the WTO. I said, don't do it. WTO and the world community won't change China. They'll change the WTO. And that's what they've done ever since. They game the system. People are afraid to stand up to them. And so it's been all these years systematically making things worse, particularly for people who have a faith or a spiritual discipline, and because they can't be controlled. Now Xi Jinping's pushing very hard, and I wrote a Washington Post op-ed saying the world leaders have to speak out against what Xi Jinping is doing to faith. He calls it Sinization. Sinization being that everything has to comport with his Marxist principles, or else you're gone. You're in jail, or your church or whatever it might be is crushed. Surveillance gets put up so that everybody's being monitored all the time. And so it's the ultimate police state, and yet they still export so much to this country, which enables their military. One other thing, Jan, I had a hearing, I've chaired 75 congressional hearings on human rights abuses in China. One of them was with Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Cisco. It took a while to get them to come. They did come. I swore them in. And what they were doing on surveilling, as well as censoring people on the internet, people who go onto Google, Google search, they said they were just following orders. And this is Chinese law. And again, the reminiscence of that this brings to mind, the remembrance, I should say, of what people said after Nazi Germany's demise. I even read a book prior to the hearing called IBM and the Holocaust, and talked about how the IBM had so enabled the Gestapo to know where the Jews were, so they could round them up and slaughter them in Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and all the other terrible concentration camps. Now you have big tech enabling this dictatorship in the cruelest of fashions, and again, they're I argued, unsuccessfully as it turns out, that if you protect human rights, please buy into that, everyone, including big tech. Rule of law and copyright infringement, intellectual property rights will also be more likely to be protected. But if not, they'll just steal everything you have. And that's what they've done. And they've used it for military purposes. They have a blue water navy. And you look at a lot of their jets and everything else, they look just like ours. They either stole or we sold them the capability to build this. And who's their natural enemy over there? Who threatens China? They threaten everybody else. Whether it be Taiwan on the short term, Japan, Korea, Philippines, and over time, the entire world.